Good evening again. I'm John Bonanni, Morris County Administrator, and I wanted to introduce tonight's topic, which is a discussion to consider an expansion of the courthouse facility. Since becoming County Administrator in 2004, the Morris County Freeholder Board has discussed various courthouse expansion options, all in an effort to provide adequate, accessible, secure, and compliant facilities for judiciary purposes. Some of the options considered in the past included adding an additional story to the existing courthouse complex, along with constructing a new facility on the former site of the old correctional facility, as well as purchasing additional adjacent private properties and buildings for courthouse purposes. In 2017, the Freeholder Board commissioned a comprehensive court and county space needs assessment, which was presented to the Freeholder Board in November of 2017 and highlighted inadequacies of existing space, accessibility, life safety, building system concerns, and presented a recommended solution that begins with the potential consideration of a construction of a criminal courthouse on the existing Morris County-owned surface parking lot, which is right outside that window. In 2018, the Freeholder Board adopted a capital budget that included a line item to design a potential expansion criminal courthouse outside this building. The space needs assessment was discussed several times by the board in 2018, and in the fall of 2018, the Freeholder Board introduced and adopted 2 corresponding ordinances to fund that design. At the December 26th Freeholder work session, a program review evaluation technique, or otherwise known as PERT chart, was presented and discussed with the board, delineating the various steps and freeholder decision points that would occur prior to any construction commencing. This evening, we will hear from our assignment judge, Stuart Minkowitz, our sheriff, James Gannon, Law and Public Safety Director, Scott Gallipo, and County Engineer, Chris Vitz. Each will briefly discuss with the board the concerns they see with the existing facilities related to their individual specialties and disciplines. A video of this presentation will be uploaded on the county's website, where a redacted version of the space needs assessment exists. Beginning this evening and for the next month, members of the public will be permitted an opportunity to submit their individual comments to the board related to this item. At that point, the Freeholder Board will consider their options and begin their deliberations. So with that in mind, I would like to turn it over to the Honorable Judge Minkowitz. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Freeholders, for allowing me to come and present to you today, and I truly appreciate that. When this first came up, this kind of came as a result of constant attempts to rehabilitate certain areas of the courthouse. And I guess at a certain point, we addressed the issue of whether we can continue doing this and how long we can continue doing this. And that's how this came about, at least our concerns in terms of the court. We have some slides up and just some small examples of issues that we have faced and will continue to face in the future if there is no additional space for us. Right now, our space is nearly impossible to modify. We are compartmentalized into tiny, small rooms throughout the entire complex, both in this building and the building across the street, the main courthouse. 2 examples of that, and these are not the only examples, but we wanted to keep it small. You can see 2 offices that we've converted. Both of these offices are actually closets that were converted into offices for staff, and that's because we're running out of room. We're pretty much at full capacity, and when I say that, I can tell you that I am constantly going to the facilities manager, Chris Walker, and asking him if there's any available space that we can take for our own staff, and we're at our limits at this point. It's very difficult for the courts to maintain operational efficiencies when we have members of divisions in this building, in the building across the street, separated by floors in small offices where we don't have the ability to centralize supervision, oversight, or to make things run smoother. That means cases take longer to process, in the long run. So we would like to see if we can fix that issue. You can see here in these slides, we've got significant issues when it comes to courtroom space. The first slide that you see there, that is courtroom number 5. That was originally built in 1847. That was originally, if I'm not mistaken, the surrogate's courtroom. You can see wires all over the floors. That because we don't even have power outlets in many of our offices or rooms. We can't even plug in things. So we'll have wires running from one side of the room to the other. And unfortunately, we've had some significant mishaps in the courtroom with people tripping over wires. There have been lawsuits that have been filed as a result. We've tried to tape them down. We've tried to do everything we possibly can, but in modern day technology, almost everything requires a power source, and there's no way to keep that going with the limitations we have now. We can't even sometimes, attorneys who come into courtrooms can't even plug in a laptop, which is the common thing to do if you're about to begin a trial. We have limitations in size in our courtrooms. Current courtroom specifications, according to the Administrative Office of the Courts, fall from much larger courtrooms than we have now, particularly for criminal division. Criminal division requires much larger jury pools because of criminal justice reform. In order to get eligible jurors to sit for long-term cases, we need a lot of people. The maximum we can sit in our largest galleries, with the exception of the historic courtroom, is 49 people. So if you think about it, 49 people may sound like a lot at first. We need to seat, for a long-term trial in criminal, 16 jurors. And for 16 jurors to be yielded, sometimes we need to go through 200 to 300 jurors. Our main jury room, which is our central jury room on the first floor, has a maximum capacity of 105. So you can do the math. If 2 judges ask for juries, and we have 19 full-time judges assigned to Morris, we have 1 vacancy now. If 2 judges ask for juries, we're out of jurors, and we can't call anymore. I have had to, as a result, change jury service from 1 day, 1 trial to 2 days, 1 trial, and we may have to consider going to 3 days, 1 trial if we can't get enough eligible jurors inside our courtroom. So we actually have physical space issues that affect the processing of trials as we go through, particularly when it comes to criminal trials, which take a long time. We also have long-term civil trials, medical malpractice cases. They take weeks upon weeks, and we need to seat 8 to 10 jurors for those cases. And they also take a much longer time now because we don't have the physical space to put the jurors. We also have no separation. The judges and court staff have no separation between us and the public. Now, it's not that we don't want to see the public, but there are significant problems that happen when particularly judges and immediate courtroom staff have interactions with the public. Often things can be overheard between conversations between clients and their attorneys. If the judge were to hear an overheard conversation, we can get to our chambers without walking through the crowd that's waiting to get into our courtroom. And if we have to walk to our chambers and we're hearing conversations between an attorney and their client, we actually might wind up being disqualified from the case because we overheard something we shouldn't hear before hearing the case. We also have security concerns, and I think the sheriff's going to address that a little bit later. Significant security concerns, particularly when it comes to our high impact dockets, such as not just criminal, but domestic violence and landlord-tenant. Those are high impact, high emotion cases, places where it becomes a higher security concern, where members of the public may think, or litigants particularly, may think they can interact with the judge, and sometimes in a high impact type of way. And that would be obviously a security issue. We've had to eliminate our training rooms. Now, we only really had 2 training rooms, 1 small computer laboratory, and we had a regular training room for classrooms. We have constant training for employees and judges, and we need a space to put them. We also, unfortunately, under our new guidelines, our original grand jury, which had been in courtroom 5, needed to be moved because the grand jury courtroom where it was in the middle of the highest trafficked area in the entire courthouse. And having it there allowed confidential witnesses, undercover police officers. They were in complete full view of the public as they were coming into the second floor entry into the courthouse, and that was an inappropriate space for them, not to mention the fact that grand jurors could be identified as they walked into the grand jury. So we wanted to move that out of view, and we used our training room, which is now in secured space, in the back areas in order to supply that. That courtroom then became our central judicial processing court, which is administered, and that's the courtroom that you see there up the upper left, and it's also the gallery is in there in the middle. That courtroom is now utilized for our first appearances and releases. It's very difficult for the sheriff's department, and the sheriff can get into that getting prisoners. There's only one entrance and egress from that courtroom. And it's very difficult operating with security-wise, but also just operationally out of one door. The other courtroom you see on the right hand, that's courtroom number 12, and that actually was never a courtroom. That was built as the Freeholders meeting room in 1974 when that building was completed. And we have basically jerry-rigged that courtroom to make it, that room, and to make it a courtroom where it really was never meant to be. You can see there's a bench there. That bench is actually not for seating. That bench is actually the barrier between the gallery and there is no well of the court in that room. So there's actually there's no physical way of separating the well other than just turning around one of those benches, and that's the way it's done. Unfortunately, because of that, we now don't have the ability to seat all the members of the drug court, and so we have nothing but standing room only in that room. So it's really not suited. In the next room, so I told you before, in criminal juries, we have to select 16 jurors. That's 12 seated jurors with 4 alternates, because most of our trials now are long-term trials, meaning they're going to take many weeks. So we pick 4 alternates just in case we lose jurors during the course of the trial. You're seeing right now a group of 16 people. You actually can't see all 16 because they wouldn't fit in the photo. That's my staff, by the way, and I thank them for modeling for that for the moment. That room is 11 feet 4 inches by 15 feet 10 inches for 16 people, and there are no windows in that room. So I have to tell you, if you're a juror, if you're one of those 16 jurors selected for a criminal trial, you're sitting in a closed-in room of 11 by 15 and with no windows, and you're there sometimes for hours, sometimes days, trapped in that room, so to speak, trying to deliberate. So if you can imagine yourself, by the way, there's 2 rows, and you can't see it from this slide, but there's a back row there. There actually has to be 2 rows of seating behind the individual person. If you're a juror and you're trying to deliberate over somebody's liberty, imagine the conditions that you have to be in when you have to deliberate over somebody's liberty. And I don't think anybody here would be jealous of those individuals who have to be sitting in that room for that period of time. So access to the courthouse is also quite challenging. When I say access, it says here access for disabled. It is absolutely impossible for someone in a wheelchair, a walker, or a cane to get to a certain portion of the second floor of the courthouse because of steps. Steps in which we cannot repair. By the way, that building, for those who don't know, the main courthouse was built in 1827. The sheriff's house, which is the other part of the second floor, was built in 1888, and they were connected sometime in the 1950s, I believe. There are steps there to connect the buildings. The steps are enclosed in hallways, and there's no way for us to even put in handicap ramps in there. So there is none. So if you have difficulty walking, there is virtually no way you can get to courtroom 8 or 9 on the second floor, unless you first go down to the first floor, walk through controlled space through our finance division, by the way, violates IRS guidelines, to get to the other side of the first floor, come up the elevator on the second floor on the other side, and then come across that way. and that's the only way you can get to those courtrooms. And this has nothing to do with anything that anybody's done in this century. It's just this is the way it's evolved over the years. Whenever we consider, and this again will be discussed a little later, consider any repairs in the historic section of the courthouse, and that would encompass 6 courtrooms and a lot of office space. You cannot do those repairs or construction without approval from historic preservation and specialty contractors who can deal with historic buildings. That makes repairs very lengthy. And right now I have 2 leaks in my chambers. Not to say, but we have leaks also in several other chambers. And again, it's just the age of the structure. And to get them repaired takes an extended period of time to get those repairs effected, and it displaces people while it's happening. It's in a crowded place, it even makes it that much harder. Vulnerable litigants. So we have a courtroom just designed, not designed, it was never designed, a courtroom that we've set aside because it's the best courtroom possible in our current facility for domestic violence. And right now, although it's part of our best practices to have a waiting room for victims of domestic violence while their proceedings are going on, which is usually monitored by a sheriff's officer and separated so that they don't walk into defendants. We don't have that here because we just don't have the space for it. We do the best we can, and with the assistance of JVWS and the Domestic Violence Working Group, we've tried to make as much accommodations as we possibly can with the limitations of our space. But in effect, what's happening is that victims of domestic violence are being interviewed in open spaces where the defendants can walk past them at any moment. And that's unfortunate, but nothing we can really do. So we have no space for vulnerable litigants. We also have no place for specialty visitors or witnesses. For example, as I indicated before, confidential informants or undercover police officers. We have no space for them right now to come into the courthouse to stay while they're waiting to be called to the stand. We talked about the judges in vulnerable security positions. So we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So, as you can tell if you've walked through our complex in any recent day, we have not shrunk in size, we're expanding in size, and that's not because we want to expand in size, it's because since the last addition to the courthouse, which was completed I think in 1974, maybe a little bit earlier, we have grown significantly. In 1974, there were only 10 judges assigned to Morris County. Again, that's the last time we had an expansion of the courthouse. We now have 19. And that's not including a tax court judge, which gets his own courtroom and chambers, which we currently have here in our complex. And not including 3 recall judges, which we currently have, and that's a reduction from 2 years ago when we had 5. We only have 3 right now, but we're going to have another one in April. So we will have up to 4 recall judges in April. We also have 3 hearing officers, and they need hearing office space. They need hearing officer space, which are smaller courtrooms, and we don't have a lot of space for them either. We have spaces that we've been modifying over the time to address them, but right now we have, for example, our domestic violence hearing officer meets in her office with litigants in a closed office because we really don't have space. Our hearing office, we do have a hearing officer room, which is the CJP room, and we have one here in this building on the 1st floor, but because they overlap in timing, we can't use the same room at the same time. So we have expanded in size because Morris County has expanded in size, and that's why we have more judicial resources that have been assigned to our county, which is a good thing. We've just never modified the space since 1974 to accommodate that expansion. So we're doing the best we can, but we can't do with this much longer. We are getting bigger. We've been assigned with a lot more social programming than we've ever had before, something that never happened in 1974 or even 1992 when the additional 4 courtrooms were given in this building. We now have drug court, which is something we never had before. When I took over as drug court judge in 2011, we had 82 drug court participants in Morris County. We now have close to 230. So we now have to provide services for those 230 participants. Those services are not just substance abuse services, mental health services, housing services, assistance and aid. All that has to be provided to this very vulnerable population of drug court probationers. So we have to provide it, we just don't have space for it. We want to be able to provide space for mental health, particularly because much of our criminal docket can often be populated by people with significant mental health issues. And we have no ability to connect them to services. Some of them don't have homes. And because they have to come see us, we have that extraordinary opportunity to be able to connect them to services right here in this building when they come see us at pretrial services. But we can't do that right now because we just don't have the space for it. In a nutshell, we're growing. We anticipate that we will continue to grow, and we just don't have the space to do it. And so that's when these issues came more to the forefront. And I hope that we can reach some accommodation, that we can provide the citizens of Morris County with the services that they really deserve in their court system, because we really primarily serve the citizens of Morris County. So thank you very much, and I will turn it back over to Sheriff Gannon. Thank you.
That's a good point.
Thank you very much, Judge. Good evening. I'm Sheriff James Gannon, the Sheriff of Morris County. Thank you for the invitation to brief the public and to brief the Freeholder Board on my duties as in providing security to the courthouse complex here in Morris County. I've said many times in the past that my #1 responsibility as Morris County Sheriff is to ensure that people come into the courthouse without fear or intimidation to bring their case before the court. Simplest terms, right, of the responsibilities of the sheriff, and we do a good job at that here. I'd like to refer to the slide just so we're oriented appropriately on the courthouse complex there. As you look at the top there, you see the 1827 building, the historic courthouse. You know, the historic courthouse, the architect was Sheriff Joseph Lindsley. He was actually the sheriff of Morris County, and they moved from the Morristown Green into that building. I think bought the property at a reasonable price, obviously, at the time. I think from the Wood family, about $200 for the property, right, in 1827. And developed this courthouse, as the judge said, 1827. Then you have the sheriff's house in 1888, which we're still using today. But you can also see the 1931 addition, which is on Ann Street. You can see the 1955 addition, which is on Western Avenue. The 1970 addition, which is on Ann and Western. The 1970 bridge on Court Street, and then 85 Schuyler Building was expanded, and in 89, the County Administration Building on Court Street. Next slide, please. About 600,000 people visit the courthouse complex each year. We screen people that come into the facility. My Protective Services Division provides that to anyone that comes through. We've taken about 170 prohibited items off of people last year in 2018. These items are inclusive of some large knives, pepper spray, scissors, throwing stars, lockpick sets, and even handcuff keys. So, you know, things have changed, right? We all know that in the world, things have changed. We have a top-notch security program, but that's what we deal with in these environments. Next. I'd like to, break this down into 4 different categories. #1 is security challenges. There's an increased threat picture. Okay, we all know that we are not that far away from things that have been happening, whether it was in Elizabeth or things happening in New York City. We're just not that far away from things that have happened. We're in a more emotionally charged environments here. You know, there's limited setbacks, right? The bottom line is we park on Western Avenue, we park on Ann Street, we park on Court Street. There's limited setbacks, and the reason for that is in 1827 there was no cars, right? So the design of the building, I think, is brilliant. Judge Minkowitz and all of us share that thought about this historic courthouse. It's a beautiful, beautiful building, but with security as it is today, we need better than that. It's challenging, as the judge said, keeping litigants apart, witnesses, victims, defendants. We manage threats against the judges that occur here in this county. We deal a lot of times, as the judge said, in these emotionally charged environments, domestic violence, sexual assault survivors, sometimes children that are in the facility. They're in these facilities and they're mingling with people, maybe offenders and things like that. So it's hard to keep people apart. We do our best with regards to that, but it is difficult. As the judge said, we're on the National Historic Register. So there are restrictions due to that. We have difficult navigation and wayfinding for seniors, the public, attorneys, people unfamiliar with the courthouse complex, whether handicapped or not handicapped. You know, the pitch of the steps is very difficult. You know, obviously ADA compliance is a problem with regards to that. I have spent time myself individually and some of my staff walking the facility in wheelchairs, and ambulating, trying to traverse the environment in a wheelchair, and it's impossible in certain locations, and it's my belief that people have a right to do that, to present their cases before the court. Oftentimes we assist people. You know, my officers in the Protective Services Division assist people in going through the courthouse. They're truly ambassadors of that courthouse complex. However, when the fire alarm goes, and the Morristown Fire Department, the police department's responding, and my officers are responding, it's hard to get people out. There's certain areas where they're very difficult to get people out in a quick fashion, you know, and the construction of the building obviously is very old and things like that, and so that becomes problematic also. Safety challenges, lack of fire suppression system. There's no fire suppression system, it's an old building, okay? It's problematic in getting people out, and it's a concern of mine. I think, you know, I have people, and some officers here. I think when that fire alarm goes off in that building, it's all hands on deck to make certain that we get everybody out. And we do that, you know, we do that very quickly, but it's a big place, a lot of people, and people need assistance. You know, I stand by the entrance to the courthouse and watch people come in, and when they look at the steps going up, they say, is there any other way to get here? You know, it's just it's a hard pitch. People are upset that they're there, they're scared that they're there sometimes, and those types of things. So those are the types of things. You know, getting people in the facility, we can do it as ambassadors and good people, right? We can get people in. But when you have rapid evacuation, that's the problem, rapid evacuation. You know, in all times, you know, prisoners in the hallway, right? We don't have a special place for prisoners to be out. So I just wanted to thank you all for your time here today to go over this. I think it's really important. And finally, it's my honor to introduce our Law and Public Safety Director, Scott DiGiralomo, who's going to speak about life safety. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Stuart. My voice projects. All right, good evening. It's always tough to follow the sheriff speaking. I'm going to talk a little bit about the life safety concerns. Back in 2007, before I was the department director, I was the fire marshal for the county, and the fire marshal still reports to me. So one of the areas that we looked at back in 2007 is, especially in the historic part of the facility, is what were the fire safety concerns. And they were complex enough at that time that we actually had a fire safety consultant to come in to look at some of the options that we could do to address some of those life safety concerns. One of the primary areas, and we all know if you've looked at historically from fires and big fires that happened, is stairwells. In the current complex, 7 of the 10 stairwells are open stairwells. So when people come in, if you look at even in here, if there's a fire, we all know fire, heat rises and smoke rises. And in assembly occupancies like a courthouse, like a building like this, the egress stairs, the stairs that you go out, have to be enclosed. So if we're here, not the atrium, but all of the fire exit stairwells, you have to go through a door, and then that stairwell is essentially separated from the rest of the building. So if there's a fire on the first floor, and you went in the stairwell, you would be able to get all the way out to outside the building without the smoke and the heat that was on the first floor coming into the stairwells. In the courthouse, as you can see from those slides, there are open stairwells. So that picture on the left is the first floor of the courthouse. So if there's a fire any place on the first floor of the courthouse, the heat and smoke works like a chimney. It goes up, it hits the ceiling. When it can't go any higher, it looks for the stairwell. And so the people coming down the stairs are essentially walking down a chimney. The only way to fix that, or 2 ways to address that, is one, you have to enclose the entire path to come down the steps. And if you look at the section on the right, to do that on the right, you would essentially have to build walls around that stairwell, and that's a hallway that people get through. And the other option is to sprinkler the entire building. And trying to do something like that while it's occupied and being used is a huge undertaking. But those are options that would have to happen on that area. Thank you. Another key piece is the means of egress. The requirements for an assembly occupancy in places like this is 50%, the main entrance where people come in has to accommodate 50% of the people coming out. And I'll tie it to a movie theater. If you notice when you go into a movie theater, the whole front entrance is all glass with all doors. The statistics in fire show that in an emergency, up to 80% of the people will go out of the doors that they came in and pass exits going out. So right now, if the fire alarm went off here or there were gunshots in here, most of you would pass the exits, even though there's signs, to go out the way you always come into that building. In the courthouse, the main exit, including the new entrance, still can't accommodate 50% because of limitations to put the security equipment up and how you have to funnel. So those become funnels that back everybody back up into those stairwells that are problematic. Especially in historic areas, the finishes on most of the interior finishes don't meet the codes for assembly, and some of that is historic. Again, that would only be addressed by either changing the finishes or sprinkling the building or putting some other coatings on it, which interferes with the historic part of it. And then that building has windowless areas. And one of the challenges that we have from a fire safety standpoint, especially in older buildings, is they actually work contra to the security areas that you're trying to cover. So when we design a building, and I always go back to, some of you remember because you're my age or a little bit older, if you remember the movie Lean on Me from the principal in the city of Patterson, Joe Clark, who was having a gang problem in the schools. I guess that was back in the 80s. And what was happening was all the fire doors that weren't able to be locked, the gangs were opening up the doors and the gangs were coming in and having gang violence in the school. So he went through and chained all the fire exits, which kept the gangs out, but if there was a fire, all the kids would have burned inside the school. So a lot of times as we try and make egress and people coming in and out easier, it interferes with the security end. And an example is what we have in some of the courtrooms. Some of the courtrooms, as the judge has said, are limited in how many people you can sit there because there's only one way in and one way out. And in some, there's no choice but one way in and one way out. And other courtrooms, the only way to make it the second way out, which would be to make the doorway through the judge's chambers wide open all the time, which then interferes with security. So as a result, we have to keep the, which I know the court appreciated when we reduced your occupancy load in some of the courts down to below 50, because if you go over 50, you meet different requirements. Currently, there's some stories in the basements that are what are considered windowless storage, and there's codes, windowless basements, which there's codes that for the fire department access so the firemen don't get trapped, require sprinklers. Another area for discussion, I'll stay in the specific area, there's been talk from a security standpoint to add ballistic capabilities on areas that are accessible to the public, which would then create essentially areas that have limited access for firefighters to get in and out, which would trigger more windowless area, more sprinklers, more concerns from that end. You want to hit the button? Okay, and that's my 2 slides, and I'll bring up a Chris Vitz from the county engineer.
Good evening, everybody. I am Christopher Vitz, the Director of Public Works and County Engineer for Morris County. The current slide up that you see actually has just a very preliminary concept of the building format. Skylar Place is actually behind that building. The roadway going from left to right in front is Court Street. So you can get a general idea as to what we're looking at in constructing a new building or an expansion of the building out in the Skylar Street lot. So you go to the next slide, please. So some of the benefits of the preferred alternative. Completion of the building expansion will allow the entire criminal court function to move from the existing historic courthouse into the new building, and it will meet the current function, safety, and mobility needs required for those court facilities. The criminal courts were chosen because they are the ones that need the most security. They require the most detailed changes to courtroom layout. Constructing the 8 new courtrooms and collegial space for judges assigned to Morris County on the Skylar Place parking lot will not result in any loss of ratables, as the county already owns the property envisioned for the new building. There would be no additional takings envisioned for this project. The preferred alternative will keep all legal functions and services within the downtown complex for the duration of construction. We wouldn't have to move anybody off site. We could maintain what we do here today, and then once that new building is completed, we can relocate those court facilities over, or those people and that function over to that new structure. Building the criminal courts next to the administration and records building will streamline uses, as the prosecutor's office is in this building right below us. They could easily go back and forth to the building, and then also the jury assembly rooms will be downstairs on the 2nd floor, so it will make it much more accessible for those criminal courts to be able to pull those jurors into those courtrooms. Secure space can also be provided for judicial parking, as well as inmate transfers within separated parking areas under the new structure. So there would be additional parking that would be envisioned under this new courthouse building, and it would be secure for both the judges and for those inmates. Relocation of the criminal court functions to new space provides space within the historic courthouse to allow for relocation and renovations. So once we're able to move those people and those functions over to the new building, those areas in the existing historic courthouse would become empty. It would give us the ability to either relocate other functions to consolidate them, and then leave other areas of the building empty that we can start to renovate, add the sprinkler systems, the electric systems that we need, plumbing systems that we need. This would also allow us to continue with renovations in a structured manner over several years. It doesn't all have to be done at once. We can move through sections of the building as we can over several years. Completing the full renovations of the existing courthouse will also allow consolidation of court functions that exist off-site. There are some court functions that are at Headquarters Plaza. They can be possibly moved up here to this facility in our campus. Design and construction of the new space for criminal courts will allow Morris County to remain the hub of northern New Jersey's legal system well into the future. Go to the next slide, please. Some of the challenges of temporarily relocating court services. Relocating offices or court functions within the existing building space is impossible because we simply do not have any conducive spare space, as the judge has eloquently established. There's just not enough spare space to move people and to keep the functions going. Additionally, if we were to temporarily relocate court services off campus to another facility, it would require the relocation of an entire court set, such as criminal or family court. We can't just move a couple courtrooms to a different place. You actually have to move that entire function to a different facility just because of the way it works. You'd have to have people going back and forth all day long if you only moved a couple courtrooms. It just doesn't work that way. You have to actually move the entire court set. This would need to be done for a period of time, possibly 5 to 7 years, as that would allow us to renovate those different sections of the courthouse. The historic part of the courthouse is going to require a lot of work. It's not simply just rip down what's there and put back all new. We'd have to be cognizant of all those historic artifacts and everything in that courthouse and then continue to move through to the new spaces and work to renovate that. It may be impossible to adapt the historic areas of the courthouse to current standards, as it would destroy the historic fabric of the building. We have not identified office space off-site to relocate court facilities to, nor have we quantified the cost of that space. This space that would be needed is specialized. It's not just regular office. It has to be set up to be secure. It has to be set up like a courtroom. There has to be that separation between the public and the judges and anybody that may be on trial. This would require renovations to that off-site space, which would be costly, along with the additional monthly lease fees for that office space. Additionally, this would require splitting functions and security between the downtown campus and whatever facility we may temporarily relocate to. This would require additional sheriff and security officers, transportation for employees, jurors, inmates, and other personnel would also need to be provided. One additional thing to note is that the Space Needs Study report found that the legal industry in Morristown generates $170 million in revenue per year to our local economy. A temporary relocation of a court set would reduce that revenue significantly. For example, you wouldn't have the foot traffic for some of the restaurants or some of the other things that exist downtown. You'd lose that for that period of time. So I would like to just, in closing, the next slide will be John Bonanni, reintroduce Administrator John Bonanni.
Thank you again. I just wanted to take a moment to thank the judge, to thank Sheriff Gannon, Scott DiGiralomo, and Chris Vitz for their time, and certainly thank the Freeholder Board for taking the time to listen to this important matter. What you have in front of you is a chart that will depict, it's really not meant to confuse you guys. It's very scientific. But each of the diamonds will be decision points that the board will, based upon the input that they receive from the public, have decision points and considerations to proceed or not to proceed. I see the mayor of Morristown here. I wanted you to know, as I've discussed with your business administrator several times, that Morristown officials would be on the design team as we move forward. That's the vision for this project, if it's going to move forward. All of this information will be on our website, and there is also a little section where you could provide written comments. You could certainly always comment to the Freeholder Board at a public meeting at any time. You could always email myself at any time also. So I know we've taken a lot of time this evening. I want to thank the board for their patience, and I want to thank everyone for coming out and listening to it. So thank you.